I think I've wanted to write a novel my whole life. I mean, as I said, I wrote when I was a kid, and I did it very joyfully without any intellectual angst. You know, I kind of did it the way kids finger paint. But then when I went through adolescence, I just somehow internalized this idea that I wasn't writer material. I was too conventional. I don't know if it was because I was too female. I just felt like I'm from a happy family. I like my parents. I live in the suburbs. I just sort of started doubting my own voice and my own intelligence, which I think is unfortunately a too common thing, particularly for girls. And Brown didn't really help in that way because I found it intimidating, and I felt like I wasn't one of these writers who arrived on campus declaring themselves as writers. And I didn't know what I wanted to say. And I felt like I have the impulse to write, but I don't know what I want to say, so that must mean I'm not really meant to be a writer. I didn't really honor that impulse. And so I kept taking jobs that were kind of in the periphery of writing. I worked in publishing, and I became a journalist and then a speechwriter. And I had great adventures doing these jobs. I don't regret them. But it started more and more to feel like inauthentic to what I really wanted to do. I was using my words, but I was telling other people's stories, and I still didn't know really what's the story I want to tell, but I just wanted to do it. And I would dabble in writing, but it would be difficult, and I would stop, and I would think, well, if I were really meant to be a writer, it wouldn't be so hard. And then when I was probably almost 50, just by chance, someone asked me to join a writing group near where I lived. And I decided I would do it, just give it a try. And in this group, you could write whatever you want. You just have to show up every week with some kind of writing. And there were people in this small group, but poets, memoir, fiction, people would do various things. And we would discuss it. And then the leader of the group, who was a teacher and a writer himself, would give you back the writing the next week with comments on it. And I started to just loosen up a little, and I started to unlearn some of these things that had prevented me from writing. So talking with other writers and having this community of writers, I realized that it's hard for everybody. You know, if you feel a little queasy when you sit down to write, it doesn't mean you're not meant to be a writer. It might mean you are. And I also, most important, learned that you don't have to know what you want to say to write. You can figure it out through writing. And that is completely not the way I had to work as a journalist or speechwriter. So it was a really new thing for me. And the way I wrote my novel was really, I started writing a piece of memoir, and I had to show up the next week with more pages. And it sort of just went fictional. And I remember going into the writing group and saying, I have no idea what I'm doing and where I'm going. And the leader of the group said, just keep going. You'll figure it out. Just let the story reveal itself. And I didn't quite believe it. But that's what happened. And so the whole first draft of writing the book, I kept going, saying like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where this is going. You know, the character of Jeremy appeared, that he was the first completely fictional character that appeared. And from that point on, I was writing fiction. And when I wrote the first scene where this character appears, I knew this guy had some kind of secret, but I didn't know what it was. And I really didn't know what it was until near the end of the book when I wrote it. And I discovered it, and it kind of just clicked and it made sense. Which doesn't mean there aren't things that I discovered along the way that didn't make sense. So there were things I wrote that later threw out, but the major plot points of the novel just kind of happened, and I didn't know that that could happen. And now I've talked to a lot of writers, and I've read more, and I've heard writers speak about that same thing. I heard Susan Choi say this yesterday about Trust Exercise, which won the National Book Award, that she had no outline, she didn't know where she was going with it, and was just writing it. She said it was a side project she was writing thinking no one would read it, and she figured it out pretty well. So if not for that writing group, the combination of the encouragement to just let the writing be an act of discovery, and the community of writers to just say, don't give up, keep going, we're all struggling, you feel like what you're doing is pointless, there's no guarantee it's going to work, but it's still worth doing. And that was really from the writing group.